So we are in the final hour here, and we have a real star besides our host and hostess. We have a big star here who's the comedian Jordan Klepper, and he is joining us to discuss the role of political satire in democracy. And I've just spent the last 10 minutes warming him up. He was a little dull, and he wasn't quite on top of things, but I told him I was here for him. So he may call me back on stage. If it gets flat, just start to call me and I'll be here. Jordan is you've seen him on The Daily Show, and you know that he is really a mix of sharp wit and really insightful commentary on our society. He's one of the rare people who can make you laugh and make you think at the same time. Another rare issue. He has an incredible sense of humor in this chaotic political landscape, and he shines a light on genuine emotions and the thoughts of the people that he meets, who some might say, well, I'm not going to characterize them, but he tries to figure out or listens carefully what I think are some inane remarks or responses from the individuals, but he's respectful, which is a really big deal. And just in his questions and the answers, the viewer or this viewer, I have to give some things a second thought. So it's a reminder that beneath all the noise, we're all human. And what I believe that Jordan does is he exhibits an empathy. He tries to feel like what it's like walking in another person's skin. So he doesn't make fun of, but he brings things to the light. And in the world right now between the news and entertainment, his insights, I believe, are very helpful. Now, I just told him that was all I was going to say about him, and I was pushing it at that, of how smart he is. But our own University of Delaware professor, Dannagal, she is going to do the interview with him. Turns out her day job is director for political communications, but her night job is she works the clubs, a stand-up club, comedian. She's an improv comedian. And we're going to see her in action, both of them in action right now for our final act. So please welcome Jordan and Dana.
Thank you so much. I just want to clarify when she said I work the clubs, not those clubs.
It sounded very official. It
sounded a little bit, little X-rated. Just want to clear the record.
Let me tell you, it's 5 o'clock in Wilmington. It's time to turn up the heat,
Time to turn it up. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it is so wonderful having you here. We're excited to be at the Queen, and we're excited to really have this as the highlight of our day, talking about media and democracy.
This is the highlight. Everything has been worse than this.
Correct.
Great. Good to know. Good to know.
You are in media, and we are living in maybe democracy.
Yes. This is the final days of both, I believe.
This is it. It ends at midnight, 11:59. So just to start off, I just want to congratulate you on all of your recent successes. You're co-hosting The Daily Show, you're doing a live stand-up show, you were just in Pennsylvania, and you had the special on Comedy Central that I really am excited to talk about. And you had your week co-hosting where you did, I think, the first 3 days, right? And Jon Stewart did Thursday.
Yeah, there's a newcomer at The Daily Show named Jon Stewart. So he's... They're giving him a little tryout, and he did. Yeah. He does once a week. He's working his way up to it, but yes.
How did he do? Okay,
he did pretty good.
Did he?
Yeah. I think another 15 years it'll be like second nature for that guy.
Perfect. So the week that you were on, the most recent one, It was a wild, I don't know if you know this, but the news is sometimes depressing.
Yes.
Okay. And this particular week, the news stories included South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem shooting her puppy, and RFK Jr. It being revealed that he had a worm in his brain.
Yes, yes.
And I'm just wondering, like, did you have to fight for that week? How did that work out?
That was the atheist in me did something right, because God was like, let's give the atheist a great comedy week. There's always it's a wonderful job getting to host the Daily Show, and you're always stressed the night. As soon as the show ends, you start thinking about what the next show is going to be in the morning, and going to work, I'm looking through news stories or what have you, and then literally that RFK Jr. news story pops up along with Kristi Noem, not only self-releasing a story about how she executed her puppy, then going on to every news channel and then defending why that's important to execute your puppy. And then I get a news alert that, yes, that RFK Jr. had a worm in his brain that may have been eating his brain and died in his brain. And then as a comedy show, you're like, clear the day. We got a great one today, everybody. Let's find some humor in this. So those were a gift from the comedy gods.
Which brings me to a question about how do you deal with the fact that everyone is getting these news alerts on their phones? Mm-hmm. So we all had that moment realizing this RFK Jr. headline.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Wait, did you say guilty on 8 counts?
Guilty on 8 counts. Yeah, what is your source? This is good. Good, yes. This is a media democracy. Yeah, what is your source? Alex Jones says guilty. I believe it. Let's take, yeah. The New York Times says guilty. What are you on right now? Reuters? Oh, you're a Reuters? Oh, you're not going to find out for a week and a half on Reuters. Come on. Somebody's going to jump to it. Is AP weighed in on this yet? You can't load AP right now. Invest in infrastructure, AP. Wow. Guilty on A. Look at that.
Okay, so what does that mean, Jordan? Since you're a political analyst.
I am a political analyst, right? Play one on television. Well, first of all, I'm shocked that 12 people can agree on anything in this day and age. I didn't expect.
It's New York, Jordan.
I know.
It's New York.
I didn't expect accountability to ever enter into the Trump atmosphere. It doesn't feel like that's something he's ever had to face. And still, we'll see where this accountability goes. I'm still skeptical. I need to read it in 10 different newspapers and then see what actually happens afterwards. We'll be curious to see what happens with the sentencing. But that is truly surprising to me. I do think we are so divided right now, especially around anything Trump related, that even in New York, I know it is a progressive, liberal-leaning place, but to find a jury of 12 people agreeing on one thing in a day and a half is fucking bonkers to me.
It's really bananas.
What?
I don't even know what to do right now.
Oh my God, wait a minute. I'm getting an update here right now. Oh, the Democracy Summit has been, they got a second season already, just like that.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Look at that.
Amazing.
Democracy Summit will live again. Just like that. A third season and a fourth season. Unbelievable.
Look at that.
Wow, it's already helping the economy. Look at that.
Wow. Oh my goodness. All right. Well,
Wow.
Jordan. We're gonna have to let that sink in. I just want to say, when you said that about how it's really hard, you feel like that the concept of accountability hasn't really played any role, because at every pass, even when it feels like there might be accountability, it turns out it's not actual accountability.
Yes, and I think, like, in the world of Donald Trump, for many people, for a lot of this country, we have lost a faith in institutions, especially over the last 6 years. And I think we've watched a person who has had unbelievable privileges his entire life and has seemed to face no repercussions for the mores that he steps over, legal or social. Any of those norms that he breaks, he faces zero repercussions. In fact, he's lauded for them. He runs on them and he becomes a hero. He becomes godly in some people's mind. And so I will say it's not uncommon for most people I talked to had no faith in any kind of American justice system finding fault in anything that he does. and still, there's a process that's going to play out. I'm sure there's going to be appeals, and who knows what will happen with sentencing. But I think for a lot of people, I'm sure, in hearing this, you hear the gasps in this room, and it's not gasps over the things that he's done. We've seen him step over that line. We've seen him break the law. He records himself on tape breaking the law. It happens so regularly. We're so inured to it that we're not shocked by the transgression. We're shocked at the justice. And I think that hopefully will begin to change. So yay for being shocked at justice.
That's a great line.
May it surprise us again and again.
I'm going to get a shirt. It says shocked by the
Shocked at
justice.
justice. They don't even have an emoji in your phone for that. It's such a
No.
new emotion for Americans.
Is it the head exploding one?
It might be.
With the scale
With the scale, yes.
next to it. I like it. So I'm going to somehow tie this back around to what we were supposed to talk about. Ready?
Which
Watch
was
this.
that? Was it puppy killing or worm brain? Where were we at?
No, I don't know. We've moved past that
We
question.
moved past it. Okay.
We moved past that question. No, the question of I'm going to hopefully we have a clip that we can queue up that shows you doing your segment, Jordan Klepper Fingers the Pulse, where you go to these events and you talk to usually like Trump supporters or MAGA supporters, usually at either rallies or other events where they're gathering and celebrating or not celebrating or protesting. And you have a lot of FaceTime interacting with these folks. And so I would love for us to, if we do have that clip, be able to see one of these clips first. And given your experience talking to these folks, I would love to hear what you think they are going to do given the news that we just heard. How was that for tying it back together?
Good, really
Pretty
weaving it
good,
together.
right?
Well done. Well done.
Okay. So do we have a clip? Is that a thumbs up? When these moments happen, do you know as they're happening, this is one of the moments that
I'm walking in this moment. Yeah, I mean, yes, to some degree. I will say there's nothing but hypocrisy to be found out there on the political landscape. But the world, specifically at a MAGA rally, is full of a ton of BS that is spewed on all of the internet streams and the Trump streams. That there are times we go back to the editing bay and we will watch it again and be like, "Wait, what did they just say that we skipped over?" Like it's super fast with the conspiracy theories, the wild ideas, and the back and forth logic games. So we definitely recognize moments when we're in them, and then we go back to the edit and we're like, my Lord, there's just so much out there. But I will say what's so interesting, like that was from what? That was from maybe 4 months ago, maybe. And in talking about what just happened right now, as far as like that was the first time we'd been on the road in since Trump's arrest. And as you've seen, they used that image as a thing to run on, and it very quickly became a symbol of defiance. And so when we look at what's going to happen now with what happened today, like I see much more of that. Like we've already seen a week of Fox News and folks already creating the narrative around what happens if Trump is found guilty. So I feel like the audience is already primed with their defense. They already didn't trust the system to begin with. And I think like the t-shirts at the next rally are going to be clutch. They're gonna be high end and nice, and it's gonna be a whole new thing to talk about. So I don't see it denting the conversation, just only adding to the t-shirts put out into the worst dressed people in America.
But when you can commodify like a mugshot, right?
Yep.
And with a revelation like how Trump hadn't actually paid taxes, and then that's like, oh well, that's because he's really smart, and smart people don't pay taxes. So all of these little inversions that they do. If he's actually punished and suffers consequences, how do you, I mean, I'm sure they can, but how do you think that they'll commodify that?
I think his superpower is his shamelessness. I think if he apologized for what he did and said, I made a mistake, then so much crumbles. Because I think what you see out there is not a discussion over policies. Sometimes that's what we have, but I don't think that's at the core of what we're actually arguing about. I think it's identity. People have identified with Donald Trump. They're wearing, you don't buy 40 hats because you like his immigration policy. You buy 40 hats because you're now the Trump guy. You love that. And he's a guy who says, screw the system, and the system's been mean to you. And so I think Donald Trump getting convicted, he says, well, the system's against him, the system's against me as well. If Donald Trump came out and said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, then that's where that begins to crack. But I think shamelessness, it is a weapon, and it is a powerful weapon. And you look back at like what happened with Watergate, and Nixon was like, for the good of the country, I made a mistake, I'm stepping down. And I think that was such an important moment in American history that we assumed was just was the lowest bar you had to clear for a leader. It was like, oh, well, for the good of the country, okay, that'll happen. That's not how Donald Trump thinks. And because he is shameless across the board, then that image will never crack for the people who base their identity around it.
That's depressing. Let me
The
pivot.
T-shirts are going to be fire, though. To
Okay,
be clear,
so,
they're
yeah.
going to be great T-shirts.
Let's go back to the costume stuff because that's
Okay,
funny.
yeah,
Let's go back to that for a second. So when you're at these rallies and there are people literally cloaked in flags, like that one guy. And
Yeah.
by the way, shout out to New Hampshire. That's where I'm from. That's why I chose that clip because it's right near where my parents live.
Beautiful
So,
part of the
yeah,
country.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
really good times up there. Those people are fun. So when we're talking about like these rallies with this sort of all the garb, it feels as though so much of these events and these rallies is a celebration as much as it's like, screw you,
Yeah.
we're not going down. Is it possible that there's kind of this ritualistic, like entertainment factor involved in these celebrations?
100%. I think that's what it is. Number one, I think politics has become something you can consume. It's not a nerdy thing. It's a celebratory thing. It's like a parade. People are like, what's it like to go to a Trump rally? You should go to a Trump rally if you've never been. It is fun. When the parade comes to town, the town comes out. They put on their best wear. They party. It feels like a tailgate. I laugh because my family, I grew up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We're big Michigan Wolverine fans. I was going to be named after Bo Schembechler, the coach, if they won the '79 Rose Bowl. Thank God they didn't.
We're going to be named after
I
the
was going to be
last
Bo.
name?
I would have been named Bo if we won the '79 Rose
I
Bowl.
thought you meant you were going to be named Schlebebediga.
Schembechler, yes. Very close in that pronunciation, Dano. Very
Was
close.
it?
Yeah, I would have been
Schebegabedga.
blah, 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 Klepper. We grew up going to Michigan games. I literally have, at my home right now, I probably have 8 Michigan caps at home. I got all
How
the
much
swag.
did each of those caps cost, Jordan?
About $20 each. I have thousands. I am that man, but for Michigan. Because it's fun and it's identity. You put that thing on, you go to Ann Arbor and you see other people who love something you love. And I think that is an intoxicating thing. We all want meaning in our lives. We want community, and wearing that apparel gives you that. And what's so funny is I'm on a text chain with my family, and my parents were conservative, but over the last 8 years have become raging liberals. The Trump era turned them, and so they are on a text chain with me, and they bitch about the world of Donald Trump constantly, and how can people believe all of these election denialisms? That's what my text feed is. Simultaneously, it's also about how much we love the Michigan Wolverines. And a funny thing happened this year with the Michigan Wolverines is they were accused of cheating to win games. And Michigan Wolverines won the national championship this year, but half the country thinks they cheated. And the wild thing is they totally cheated. But if you bring that up to my parents, they are like, no fucking way did they cheat. Where are your sources? I don't believe that. They're good people. And I will literally put them to that. I'm like, this is the same argument that you use against the MAGA cult. And they're like, well, but Michigan's different. I just think they don't understand that we are good people. This is what everybody does. And you see this normalization. And it's different consequences when you look at the world of football, or you look at the world of politics. But this tribal nature of like identity, like we are Michigan Wolverines fans, and we will do anything to not have to see cracks in that identity.
So why is it that you see the cracks, Jordan?
Why don't I see the cracks?
Yeah, why is it that you are able to see the cracks? You just conceded that they cheated.
I did. That took work.
Did it hurt?
It did hurt. It didn't feel good. But as soon as I was able to separate myself from being Jordan Klepper, the Michigan Wolverine fan, to being Jordan Klepper, who is also a Michigan Wolverine fan, it was easier for me to call out some of the BS. It didn't mean it didn't hurt, and I could already feel. I mean, we all have it. I think it's a natural. It's a natural tribal instinct of like. Sports is the easiest way for me to see it. Of like a bad thing happens to that player, or your coach did something really shitty, morally repugnant. The first thing you do, if you're a Penn State fan and Joe Paterno did something bad, is be like, "Well, I don't know. Probably not." It's because you bought the hat, and I think that's the danger. Is in buying the hat, you become the person, and you become impossible to take any criticism about that thing. And I think a lot of Democrats don't buy the hats; they just vote for the person who helps the policies, because that's what politics was. And I think Trump pulled the trick, and he made you buy the hat and made you be on the team in a way that makes it really hard to get off that team train.
So maybe democracy needs a hat.
Democracy needs a hat, or if the hats could get so ugly that nobody wanted a hat, then we might be in a good place.
Okay, maybe.
This metaphor is deep. I don't. I don't know if it holds up.
I think
really
it
don't
broke.
know.
So wait. Let's go back to Kalamazoo, metaphorically.
Yes.
So you grew up in Kalamazoo, and you studied. Again, you just said that Wikipedia is full of misinformation. I'm a misinformation
You looked
scholar.
at Wikipedia.
No.
This is the future of democracy does not lie on Wikipedia.
Looked at Wikipedia.
Sure.
And so you majored in theater and math?
Yes.
Oh, wow, good. Good. I mean, not that it's not good to major in theater, but look at you, backup plan.
Backup plan. I was a nerd in high school, and I got a math scholarship, and I took it. And halfway through college, I found improv comedy, and it kind of blew my mind. We were talking about it backstage. We both have a love of improv, and so I was like, I'm good at math. I like math. I love the logic of math, but I'd never. I grew up as a kid who sort of. I had a wonderful childhood, but I believed there was a path. You do good in school, you go to college, you learn these things, and that's what you do. And then in college, they were like, what about this theater thing? And I was like, this is wild. I get to talk about feelings. I get to run around in a costume. I get to pretend to be a dandelion, and people will laugh at it. Like 3 people
They
laughed
let you
at
be
it.
a dandelion?
It was a very forgiving audience in
Okay.
college. But that sort of broke my brain in a lovely way of like, oh, I like thinking like this. I like being open to these experiences. And I started to kind of follow that thing post-college.
So then you did Second City, Chicago, and then you did UCB or Upright Citizens Brigade.
Mhm.
So that is all in the world of improv. And so what I do want to talk to you about, because we both share a love of improv,
Mhm.
and the philosophy of improvisation is rooted in yes and listening to your scene partner and building something together. And I'm wondering to what extent those skills allow you to have those conversations that you have with these folks. Can you talk about how you think about those dialogues in the moment in a way that, as Valerie said, has empathy and also allows them to be humans with dignity while you are subtly illustrating hypocrisy or incongruities in what they're
Well,
saying?
I think that's kind of you to say. I think improv is kind of integral to the stuff I've always done. I think at the heart of it is listening. And so when you're out in the field, the number one thing is do your research beforehand. When I walk in the field, I've thought through arguments, hypocrisies. I've talked with other people, so I sort of know some of the talking points, but you never really know until you're out there what people care about, and that's why you go into the field. Then you listen hard, you see what the unusual, interesting thing is, and you support their ideas. I think what's different than what I get to do that traditional journalists do is I get to say yes to their ideas. I get to make them feel comfortable. I want to hear more. I want them to reveal something that they wouldn't normally reveal when their guard is up. And so, yeah, I'm looking for them to keep talking, to agree with their point of view, to see if they go farther beyond that. And more often than not, I think the most revealing moments are the times when they are confiding the things that they're having, the conversations that they're having with their friends, and not the ones they're having with the guarded media. And so I definitely am using improvisation in those moments. I will say also at the Daily Show, the way we craft a show throughout the day uses sort of an improviser's mindset in the first half of the day, which like improv is all about like generation. Generate ideas, jokes, perspectives, and then the second half of the day at the Daily Show is a stand-up's mindset, which is all about editing. And it's like take the things that you have and try to craft a final product. So you're always sort of using that improviser mind and also that stand-up mind when you're creating something that becomes a final product.
That is very cool. So the when you're in these conversations with folks, as they're talking about, as you're getting them to open up, right, and you're listening to them, and they're feeling comfortable. One of the things that I found is in their words is something that I've been researching in terms of why it is that people believe misinformation, and really. Unfortunately, we're not driven to understand the world as it is empirically portrayed. We're actually driven to understand the world through the motivations of comprehension, control, and community, which is what you're saying. So we want to feel like we understand it. We want to feel like we have some control over things, and we want to feel like we're part of a community. And my thing, as I think about these things, those things can lead us to the path of belief and misinformation. But those things are actually legitimate needs, right? So, and that's what I feel when they're sharing things with you and you're hearing them. A lot of the things that are underlying the things that they are believing that are untrue or that they've been exploited to believe, their needs are real, and I feel like you hear them.
I mean, I try to, and again, I don't think it's kind to see empathy in there, and I do have empathy for it, but I'm also looking to find hypocrisy and highlight it because I think it's also representative of, I think, like what is cancerous in our dialogue. But I think it is important to not just see it as like, look at these crazy folks. It's like these ideas are crazy. it's not the people who are sharing them. And I think like you are 100% right. It's feeding a couple needs. One, a Trump rally is a victory party. And in a lot of places in America, what do you want more than anything? A victory party, to feel like you won something. When Donald Trump went, like, for people who feel disconnected from the political process and feels like government doesn't work hard enough for them, there's no expectation that government will ever give them anything. So if they get a win through identity, then that's the best they can get out of it. So I feel that there, and I understand that need. I also see, like, you need confirmation bias of the things that you think, and so people are searching that on the left and the right. It's also fun. Like, I go to rallies in Wisconsin, and I talk to these older ladies who were knee deep in QAnon theories, and you're like, what are these ladies doing with QAnon theories? Because it's fun for them. It's a hobby. It's an easy thing to do on their computer. They get to feel like they're discovering something. They're in on the know. They found something before somebody else did, and they're cool to know about that thing. And so I think, again, we judge it, and again, I think the effects of misinformation is incalculable in what it's doing to our democracy and our country. But the need to be felt powerful, and the desire to chase down something that makes you feel good, and that dopamine rush, I think, is a very natural thing that a lot of these people are chasing. And again, on both sides, I see it on the left as well. I think it's being weaponized in a perhaps more effective way on the farther right reaches, but I think I turn to my phone to look at something that makes me feel good about the way in which I see the world, and that's what I'm running up to whenever I go out into the field.
So I do want to pivot to your recent special. So in your recent special that aired on Comedy Central called Moscow Tools, you examine Russia's influence on MAGA talking points in particular,
Yep.
right? And part of the special involved you going into the field, or into actually the forest, with these Estonian fighters that were preparing for a Russian invasion, that are always preparing for a Russian invasion. And you interviewed Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. I think that's how you say it.
Kaja Kallas, yeah.
Darn it to heck.
So close.
Jordan.
Know your Estonian prime ministers. I keep saying this,
sorry.
guys.
God.
Know your Estonian. Don't be a dumb American. We all need to know the last
Too
5 Estonian
late.
prime ministers.
Anyway,
These people know it. You guys know it.
You
Say it
knew.
with me. Let's name our favorite Estonian prime ministers. On the count of 3, who's your favorite Estonian prime minister? 1, 2, 3. There, very, very well articulated, everyone. Very well. You're lucky Estonian is guttural. You could really hide it in your in your mumblings.
So in these we're moving on. In these conversations, you were talking about life under Russian rule and what's at stake when democratic countries fall under authoritarian rule. So I'll come around in a second.
Yeah.
So in the work that I've done, the psychology and influence of satire, what I found is that the direct effects of exposure to satire on attitudes and beliefs and behaviors are actually not huge, right? They're very hard to find, the direct effects on, like, persuasion, right? However, satire is quite adept at getting an audience to think about issues or events, putting them on their agenda, and satire is also really good at inviting sort of exploration, discussion, and critical thinking about the topics that are in the satire, okay? So I'm wondering if with that special, is this what you're doing? And if this isn't what you're doing, what are you doing, Jordan?
I'm trying to get health insurance. That's number 1.
We all are.
Get a special, get on TV, get this health insurance, survive to the next day. It's really interesting hearing you talk about your research with satire, and that feels right in line with the things that I see. People often ask, like, are you changing people's mind with this? That's not the goal. I think Jon Stewart often said with The Daily Show, like, find bullshit, call it out. We're trying to find humor in that. And I think the effects of satire can be community. It's drawing attention to the bullshit you see, making you feel less crazy because you see it as well. You're contextualizing it for a way that people can understand it in a way they maybe couldn't elsewhere. But I don't think it's like a blueprint for conversation to change minds. And I think I will say this Moscow Tool special, to me, I'm a comedian, but I'm also a citizen, and I am also aghast at the things that I see. And these details that we started to see about how Russian misinformation was affecting our funding towards Ukraine, how misinformation I was literally hearing on the campaign trail at MAGA events. And there was this Washington Post research that came out recently about Kremlin talking points that they wanted to push at MAGA events. So it was wild. As somebody who's at these events, I'm like, I'm hearing Russian misinformation out on the campaign trail. And so as a comedian, I think this is a pretty fucking big deal.
Can he say that
Can I
here?
say that here at the Queen Theater? I'm saying it. Thumbs up.
I think we got a
up.
thumbs up in the back. Okay, go ahead. You can say it again.
5:30 Wilmington. Let me tell you, after hours, we're doing it. So for me, I think what I can do is I can contextualize something that I don't think a lot of people in the Comedy Central world are engaged with right now, but I think I can articulate it through some comedy. I think oddly and crazily enough, I don't think a lot of people have sat down and listened to the Estonian Prime Minister talk about the threat at their border. And for some reason, it airs on Comedy Central, where a lot of stoners who are still watching TV after Office reruns are now watching a special on Russian misinformation. But I love that because I think it's introducing to people who might not be reading the Washington Post's breakdown of Russian misinformation. And so hopefully inviting people to this conversation, finding humor in it, because I think laughter is a recognition of you see the chaos as well. I think there's community in that. And also I think ringing the alarm on something that I truly am aghast by. And so yeah, that's what and baseline, going back to improv, curiosity. When I get to do specials for Comedy Central, it starts with what am I seeing? What am I reading? What am I thinking about right now? And how can I use this structure that we've kind of built and worked on at The Daily Show as a way to communicate it in a fresh way for audiences?
One of the things we talked about in an earlier panel today was that it does feel that journalists have an obligation that they're not really fulfilling to educate the public about what democracy means and what democracy requires.
Mm-hmm.
And that, covering this election as though it's politics as usual, like with the horse race and strategy framing and who's ahead and behind, feels somewhat criminal because one of these candidates has said that they will embrace authoritarianism, and they do every day.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if as much as we talked about how journalists have a role to play in this sort of civic education about what is involved in a democracy, how is it different from an authoritarian state? When I watched that special that you did, it felt like that was such an efficient education on what is at stake, what authoritarianism looks like, what is at stake when democracy erodes. So do you think about that at all?
I mean,
the sort of civic education piece?
I think about it from terms of what my priorities are and the shows are. I think I don't want to. It's a cheap term to call it infotainment. Of I don't want to be didactic to an audience, but I want to be honest about the things that I find important and I'm nervous about. And so I think yes. I also think the way in which what is scary to me right now about the media landscape. There's some great journalism out there. There's some great journalists out there, but the formats for this journalism are. They don't produce any kind of civic understanding or discourse, right? The business model of all these media systems are so out of line with a way in which to communicate good ideas. And I'm a part of it. I understand what Comedy Central needs, the clicks that you need, the things that people talk about. I look at these conversations on CNN, and I'm I know the bottom line, CNN needs to sell Pepto-Bismol commercials. So what is the most efficient way for them to do that? We get to play by slightly different rules, and I think in some ways it does feel borderline criminal to approach this weird media landscape and this wild authoritarian spewing candidate who's just been convicted of a federal crime, to approach it like business as usual. It's time to update the business model. I'm not saying it's through comedy, but I'm saying what I think sometimes people find in satire or moments of The Daily Show is you understand what our bias is right up top. We are not a news outlet. We are comedians. What I loved about Jon Stewart when I was a fan of his in high school or in college watching The Daily Show is I know his bias. He's a comedian. He's looking for bullshit. He's looking for comedy. I trust this guy because he's open about it. What I trust less is a media personality who's pretending that he has no bias, but he's got a ton of bias built into the system around him, the clicks that he needs, and who he is. And so I think a lot of people are drawn to not the removal of bias, but the clarity of where it lies. And I think for some, they see that in comedians because the premise is put out there right at the top.
For years, Jon Stewart would talk about, the both sidesism of news and objectivity. Shouldn't it be about objectively calling out bullshit? And see, I said it too, bullshit.
Oh my God, it feels so liberating.
It feels really good.
It's nice. It's nice.
And as someone who's a media scholar, I thought, okay, well, this is going to catch on. Jon Stewart's talking about it. And it felt like, that was 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And it didn't really. It didn't enter mainstream discourse. However, right now, there are really high profile conversations being had among journalists about whether or not they need to be explicitly pro-democracy in their coverage. Not ideologically biased, right? Not saying I'm rooting for one thing over another, but at least rooting for democracy over authoritarianism.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if maybe they're starting to get there.
I mean, I think I want more articulation as to what that looks like. I think a question that we explored with the Russia special was what I'm seeing. Like Russia has a couple different goals when they dump misinformation into our ecosystem. Some of that is just to sow chaos. And I would talk to people out on the road, and they're just using this misinformation to essentially troll Democrats, to make Joe Biden look like he's inefficient. Like that's where they get their juice, and Russia feeds that. But there's a secondary thing going on that I think is a scarier question, which is I think what is bubbling up out there is a earnest desire for authoritarianism. And I think what used to be like, oh, no, I'm not pro-authoritarianism, I'm not anti-democracy, that language has shifted out on the road. And part of what we looked at is like, we can have that conversation. That is a hard conversation, but I don't think the people who are pro-authoritarianism and what they see in Putin's authoritarianism is somebody who's tough on crime, who's Christian, who's white and powerful. They like that. But they don't see the realities of authoritarianism. And so there's a misguided understanding of history and what things look like across the globe. And so I think that is a big question that America should reckon with. It's not just like, we're pro-democracy, what the hell are we doing? It's like, I think there's folks who want to be pro-authoritarianism. Can we address that? What does that actually look like? What do people actually want? I want journalists to, yes, articulate that. And also to push back on the dodges. I think most recently, George Stephanopoulos talks about how he's not letting any election deniers get on air without asking if they accept the last election results and if they'll accept the next ones. And he's like, it's dodged by so many people and journalists because the way in which all of these shows work. You got 4 minutes with Ted Cruz. You're going to spend one watching him dodge that question and the next 3.5 talking about something else. I get it. That's how it's set up. Donald Trump, he walks on out. He's going to dodge one question. He's going to call in 7 other people who ask him questions he wants to answer. We don't get follow-up questions. The media isn't given that. People like George Stephanopoulos, I'm glad he's like, I'm not going to ask another question so you can push your talking points till I get an answer to this one, because that dodge is dangerous. That dodge, that needs to be answered. What are you really saying when you're not accepting the results of that election? What are you really, really saying? I'm going to push you until you own up to what it is and don't just politically move on. And so that's where I want to see more moments like that. The Jonathan Swan interview from a few years back, like, to me, cut through some of that BS.
Yeah.
And again, there's great journalists out there. It's the platforms that they're on that don't allow them to do that at times. And so that's where I get most worried. But I see the glimmers of it. And it's not that you have to be pro-democracy. It's that you need to be pro calling out bullshit.
Right.
And don't let them get off because they're running out the clock in every one of these interviews.
And I wonder when you talk about, the real fear is some of these folks, maybe they do want authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always an idealist. And
oh, you poor thing.
I know.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I have to be an idealist or I wouldn't be in this business of
Sure.
studying media and democracy, right? And I always have to imagine that things will improve. And I do think that people are fundamentally good. And I know that a lot of data points suggest otherwise. However, I'm thinking when you're saying, these are folks who maybe they do want to embrace authoritarianism,
Mm-hmm.
is that actually it? Or is it that those needs that they have for whatever comprehension, control, and community have been so exploited by either people that stand to gain financially through media systems or political or in terms of power? They have so exploited those needs and they have sold them a false bill of goods. And they don't actually want what comes with authoritarianism because they don't actually know what that is.
I think that's a good articulation of it. I think that there's not a clear articulation of what authoritarianism is. And I'm slightly more pessimistic than you. I don't believe people are inherently good, but I don't think they're inherently bad. I just think people are created. they're created by their parents, they're created by their environments, they're created by their communities. And I'm raising a kid right now, and I think like sometimes I'm like, oh, that person's good. No, people worked on that person being good. People took care of that person in their community. That person was given healthy role models. That person was given healthy neighbors. That person was given a healthy diet of information. That person was created in an image of somebody who is healthy and good and kind. And I think our country is full of those people, but we earn that. And we earn that by being a community that also gave that. And I think where I get worried is not that we have more bad people who want these things, it's that we have communities that aren't creating good people anymore. And there are people who are taking advantage of that by, yes, feeding them images of like, the authoritarian cell is an easy sell. Oh man, there's crime out there. You don't get what you want. Look at these crazy people who are coming to take what you should have. What we need to lock that thing down, don't we? Oh, look at these people. They're anti-God. You believe in God. Have you heard of heaven? It's great. You should go to heaven. Believe in heaven. Hey, well, how about we bring God back into schools? That'll be good too, and you'll get what you deserve. It's a clean sell if you don't have other people around you being like, careful. There's history behind this. And those people who are selling you that are benefiting from it in ways that you don't fully understand. And so I think we need to work harder at making the good people so that they can call out the BS when they see it.
And I think that in terms of the economics of our media infrastructure right now, especially our digital media infrastructure, because it's so much about community and because some of these things become normative, like they're like social norms within communities, that like this is how people like us think about these things. Because what is being bought and sold in the economics of media are tiny little homogenous communities of people that share value systems, it really is tailor-made for the exploitation of these dynamics.
Yeah, I think that's what is so frightening to me is my pessimism lies in the conversations that we're allowed to have because of the mediums that we have on it. It's the whole the medium is the message argument. But I look at it right here, and the people I talk to, even at Trump rallies, like when I get people outside of the rallies, quite frankly, I was at an event a few months ago in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and as I'm interviewing some folks, there was a man dressed in a bespoke suit that looks like the border wall. And he has a Make America Great Again hat, he has a handlebar mustache, and he starts screaming at me, screw this guy, he sucks, don't talk to this guy. He follows me around for hours screaming at me as we're doing interviews. Donald Trump welcomes him up on stage later at the event because he's the wall guy. He signs his hat. This guy's sort of famous in the MAGA world, and he was just vitriol. It was a rough rally to be at. And to add on to that, there was a blizzard. All of our flights got canceled. I stayed in Green Bay. I drank my sorrows away. I got on a weird flight the next day, and I show up at the airport, and my flight is delayed for 3.5 hours. The small Green Bay airport. And who is there at the bar? But brick wall guy. We make eye contact, and I'm like, shit. This is a nightmare. And he's like, hey. And as soon as we get over the weird awkwardness of it all, as soon as we realize there are not cameras around, my cameras, his cameras, we drop some of this. And we start to have a conversation. And I sat and I talked to Brick Wall Guy for 3.5 hours. And we didn't agree on a lot of things, but I will tell you what, there was a softening. There was a place to have a conversation about the things he cared about. Super interesting guy. And frankly, at the time, I would have been like, that crazy guy who just screams at you, has a handlebar mustache or whatever. Super articulate, thoughtful guy, thinks about the issues, history buff, who frankly was voted for Obama, who then has conservative values, liked what Trump was able to get done. He also likes online culture, and I think sees himself as somewhat of an online comedian and found a place for himself in sort of the Trump trolley universe, and then goes to these events, one, because he finds community and meaning, but he has doubts, and he has softenings. He didn't believe the election was stolen, wished Trump wouldn't talk about those kinds of things. And we had a conversation as humans there, and I don't know. Twitter does not allow for that conversation to take place. I don't know how we make Twitter into the Green Bay airport for 3.5 hours. Hard, difficult. I don't have that answer, but I know in those moments there was at least an understanding of that person as another human, and the same thing back at me. Like we could talk about these things and not be so aggrieved by the mere suggestion of conversation. And I think that's the magic trick that we need to figure out, is how do we get back to a space where those conversations can happen?
What always gives me hope, idealist, is that when you look at the data on people's policy positions, it is so different from what you would expect from the polarized political identities that we have.
Mhm.
So when you look at people's, even something as polarizing as abortion, when you look at Republicans and Democrats' positions on abortion, there is a lot more gray in those positions than you would ever be led to believe by the conversations that we see on
Mhm.
television. And so when I hear about folks like that, what I'm thinking psychologically is happening is outside of the context of that rally, it's the same thing that you said about, are you Jordan Klepper, Michigan fan, or Jordan Klepper, who also happens to be a fan of Michigan? That political identity became diluted.
Yes, and frankly, in that moment, I'm not Jordan Klepper, the guy on TV, which has its own partisan bent to it, which I am more hyperbolic in those moments. I'm searching for something there. I'm searching for irony. And so I could disassociate myself from that. He literally he had two MAGA hats on him, but he literally had the hats off, you know? So we could see each other not as like, you're just that symbol. It's like, no, what is your deal, man? He had it back for me. And I will say this, we laughed. It was 3.5 hours. We had a funny at the end of it all. We get brought onto the plane, and I go to we're in line talking to each other. And as I go and swipe my ticket, I'm in an exit row, and the woman says, "Oh, you're in an emergency exit row. Do you accept the responsibilities of in that row?" And I say, "Yes, I do." And I turn to him and I go, "I hope this fucking freaks you out, man." And you know what he did? He laughed.
Yeah.
And I thought that, I was like, that's it right there.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm gonna poke at this guy. And the fact that he was open enough to laugh at it and see that humor, like it's not that I need to change his mind on everything, but the fact that we can have that little moment there, I was like, that's it. I want to get back to that some freaking way.
Because if he is willing to laugh and play along, he's entered the state of play, which means he's not experiencing threat
Yes.
in that moment.
Exactly.
So, and you totally changed that
Mhm.
that dynamic between you. That's so wild. So I actually think this is fascinating given what we know about Trump's penchant for these rallies, right?
Mhm.
Trump understands people very well. He loves rallies. He loves when it's raucous. He loves when the bodies are all in. And I think something happens to people. I mean, this has been, sociologists studied crowd behavior from like the early 1900s, right? There's something that happens in a crowd where people give themselves over to the crowd. There's a contagion effect psychologically. And having him outside of the context of that was completely different.
Yeah, that mob mentality. I was there on January 6th, working, to be clear.
We have a clip of that I still want to show in a second.
Oh, yes?
Yes,
Well, yeah,
we do.
I think but I think that you see it there. Is like suddenly I saw a ton of bad actors who went there to cause trouble, and I saw a lot of people who have been talking the talk get caught up in the chaos of this moment, and it is so scary to watch a group turn like that. And you see it at those rallies where when Trump would. He's doing it less now, I think, but in the last election where he'd point at a journalist or he would point at somebody in the audience and they would scream at them and get angry in that way, like, it's scary when that crowd can turn, and more often than not, I believe those people outside of that crowd situation are not looking for it, but they're given this permissive structure to indulge in their worst instincts.
Do we have that clip, the second clip for Klepper? Oh, a thumbs up. It's just a short bit from your filming on January 6th at the Capitol.
Right.
That ending was so powerful. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I think that a lot of folks really witnessed a lot more elements of the insurrection through your coverage of it. I think a lot of folks weren't watching live that day, and the coverage was so upsetting. I think a lot of folks saw it through your coverage.
I mean, it was such a strange, harrowing day. I think like we knew it was going to be intense. We didn't know it was going to go that far, but we knew what the structure of that day was going to look for. There's jokes at the beginning of that where we arrived at 9:00 and I'm asking people which way to the insurrection, because that was what was being talked about. And so throughout that day, we felt like we felt the timbre of the day shift. And then as you saw, I mean, I look back at that, it blows my freaking mind. Like it was at the same time such a tragic day and such a sad day for democracy and such an absurd day. Like talking to that man on a Segway trying to overthrow the greatest country on earth. is ludicrous. And then also Oath Keepers running on up there with cable ties in their pocket. Like it felt like just such a reflection of America at that time, where it was like it's these weekend cowboys who think they're going to do something, and there's these people who have just been fed BS for such a long time that now they actually want to hang Mike Pence. Like so much kind of came crashing that day. I will say an interesting moment that plays out a little bit earlier there that I always think of encapsulates it in some ways for me. That day I interviewed a man who was swinging a pitchfork, and he was ranting about revolution. He's swinging a pitchfork, and as I interview him, we're interrupted by a man who's screaming obscenities at us. An obscenity man was so loud that the man swinging the pitchfork shushed him, saying, "You do not speak for me," leaving me grateful to the more level-headed man swinging a pitchfork. we literally locked eyes, and he rolled his eyes as if to say, "Can you believe this fucking guy?" Just like the key to common ground is find somebody more crazy, and that's what that day was. It was just what a bonkers, sad, absurd moment in American democracy.
And you had been covering rallies for, at that point, over a year, well, more than that. And you mentioned that things maybe started to turn at some of the rallies. Did you ever feel physically under threat at any other events prior to that?
Like unfortunately, security kept ratcheting up as this goes on, and to this day. And partially that has to do with I'm not the strongest of folks. Like if I took jujitsu, maybe we could cut that security guard situation in half. But I will say I'd go to rallies, and they were always intense. Trevor Noah always laughed. He was like, "Send Jordan out because they'll talk to him." And he was right. I'm a big, lanky white guy, so it's easier for folks to talk to me. And I really felt under attack. There were a few incidents where I was rushed at and things got a little heated. But after Trump lost the last election, or at least there was the appearance of having lost the last election, things shifted. I think post-2016, I'd go to events and people felt like winners. They felt like, we're in the White House, we have it. After the last election, feeling like something had been taken away from them, the timber immediately shifted and things got much more aggro. The event that happened a month before that, the Stop the Steal event, got pretty intense, and I was surrounded by a mob that I had to kind of be rushed away for because of that. We're taken care of at the Daily Show, and I feel very lucky about the team that we travel with. But I think once the last loss occurred, it felt like this party train the MAGA folks were on had been dinged, and something was taken away from, and this articulation of like we must fight back and all of this rhetoric really weaponized this idea that you could be a hero too, in a way that has folks at rallies looking for anybody with a camera and wanting to make a stink about it.
So as we get to the last 5 minutes here, I have a theory, okay? And that theory is completely self-serving. And it is, I feel like if everyone practiced improv, it could save American democracy.
This is somebody, you do have a stake in the Comedy Sports franchise, correct?
I do.
You
Small,
do. So
yeah.
this is,
Small.
It's take an improv
I'm
class,
just saying,
save democracy.
so we're offering 101, starts next week.
It's great. Bring your family.
But the idea of being open, saying yes, giving an offer, adding to what someone else says, listening, never forcing your ideas on someone else, building something collaboratively. There's such an openness in spirit to that, and it's so exploratory. And there's also a humility. There's an inherent humility in improv because your ideas that you get on stage with are not the ideas of the scene.
Right.
Right? That's stand-up. Right? So I guess that's the spirit of humility underlying it. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
I like that a lot. I will say, at least for myself, improv was a switch went off. It changed how I thought about life. I think it kind of shifted my philosophy on the world, not to get too heady about it, and also the way in which I approach comedy. I think like improv, like you said, is about building your ideas with somebody else's. It's about collaboration. Improv is about listening. It's about finding something beautiful out of something imperfect. I think if we looked at America, if we looked at the world that way, I think it's a healthy way to approach things. Of like, how can I make what is in front of me better? And how do I do that and collaborate with someone else? I will say what has been helpful for me in those moments and what makes great improv is a sense of vulnerability. And it's hard. And again, I don't think when I look at my pieces as they're a blueprint towards this. In many ways, I think they're exposing some of the rot that is out there. I think the blueprint lies in uncertainty. It lies in being comfortable with not knowing, and that is incredibly vulnerable. But it's the way in which you attract other people to you. I've joked about it. I did a talk about this where I was like, in order to win, you may have to admit that you are a loser. And when I've made any ground with my MAGA folks or people I disagree with, the way I do that is to lead with the things that I don't know, to lead with my uncertainties. I think like failure is universal. It's the sexiest thing there is. If you can be open with the things that you're not good at, guess what? Other people in this room are not good at those things as well. They're nervous about them. They're unsure about that. And I think these devices in our pockets make us have to be more hyperbolic than we actually are. We have to be more certain with our ideas and thoughts because people are coming at us with knives. And if we aren't completely certain, then we're going to lose. And that's the way in which you have to engage with conversations on these platforms, but it's not the way you engage with human beings that you want to connect with, to fall in love with. And I think it's the essence of what improv is that vulnerability, is that openness. And for me, that has always been the root of the most open and fulfilling moments of my life.
So when folks engage in those sort of vulnerable moments and they are humble, it is so soul crushing to watch how our media landscape punishes them for those behaviors, right? When you think about, CNN, or especially on like the cable, like Fox and MSNBC, you never hear anyone say, well, this is what I think, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Could you convince me that I'm wrong? And what's hilarious though, is that very phrasing is phrasing that Jon Stewart used to always use. Again, like in the mid 2000s, when he'd have folks on from the Bush administration, he would say, here's what I see going on. This is my view on it. Can you explain to me why I'm wrong? And it was such a wild thing to see because we don't see that. And that's so important for democracy.
Yeah.
And we don't see it on the news.
Yeah.
Ever.
I mean, I don't know is maybe the sexiest phrase that is out there. And frankly, there's no space for it. I go on television shows.
I don't know.
Ooh, look at that. Isn't that nice? I don't know. I don't know. Look at this. But in the world of punditry, I don't know doesn't get you a spot on those shows. They want people with certainty. I don't know doesn't get you a 11 o'clock show on any channel. I don't know doesn't play on the internet. I don't know plays on a podcast. And I think that's what's curious. I'm not saying that podcasts are the answer, but I do think like it's a format of media where if you're curious and want to listen to somebody talk for an hour and a half about something, I think that's good. I think there's a format in that allows people to explore. And again, the structures that we have right now for our communication keep tending away from I don't know. And I think that is such a baseline to our humanity. And wherever we can retain that as not something to shy away from because it's embarrassing, but something to wear as a point of pride and an invitation, like that will only serve us in the future. I just hope there are spaces for it.
That actually is a lovely place, I think, for us to end our conversation tonight with just embracing vulnerability and embracing the spirit of uncertainty and I don't know.
I love it. Well, Dan, thank you for talking to me.
Jordan, this has been a treat and a half. Please join me in thanking Jordan Klepper.
Thank you, guys.